Antioxidants, overrated. Beliefs, underrated. Deadlines, properly rated.
Living in an age where public health tells you what to eat and how much to sleep to get, science will tell you it's about your personality and a collection of life choices that determine your longevity.
Death is nothing more than a disease.
For too long, science and spirituality have been considered two opposing sides, and until there's a reconciliation between them, I feel we'll always be missing out on the benefits and brilliance of the other.
The world is shifting towards living forever, but too many people are still addicted to death.
Yes, I'll take an eternity taco. It'll be $50,000, please. Oh crap, I don't have that money. I guess I'll just die.
Welcome to the Epoch Podcast, your weekly dose of mental foreplay. My name's Matt.
I'm Jen.
I'm Austin.
My name's Kat.
I'm Christina.
My name is David.
And this week we are talking about longevity, whether it's the ethical concerns, the legal issues surrounding it, the medical or technical developments around it, or, of course, the beliefs that surround the entire idea of longevity. We're hitting it all this week. So I know from my personal sphere, I catch a lot of stuff about the technological developments, the medical developments in the field. So whether it's nutrition and supplements, or some of the new kind of tech gear that we can get in our homes nowadays, so you don't have to even go to a special place to get. It's coming a long way. There's a lot of money being poured into it right now. What are you guys seeing? That's the main factor for boosting our longevity right now.
Medically, you mean?
However you see it.
I think
for me, the number one factor in the discussion of longevity and life in general is always going to be the spiritual factor. I think there is a whole lot, and this discussion is very big right now in every circle: the spiritual circle, tech circles, science circles, and even getting into political and financial circles. Because what happens when we start living long life and everything like that? So, it's the spiritual side of it is where this discussion has largely been held for thousands of years of the long life. Go back into the Bible times where you look at people that lived for 900 years and the idea of immortality. And it's very interesting to me that this discussion is finding its way into the scientific arena in general, which to me is extremely exciting because it now is entering into the mind of mankind in a different way than it ever has before.
Yeah, I think it's kind of funny how there are a lot of Silicon Valley billionaire dude types that are kind of like, oh yeah, I'm really annoyed by death, and they're dumping a ton of sorry, I was kind of far back. They're dumping a ton of money into research and stuff like that. Yeah, it's kind of interesting that you made that point, because it seems to be kind of creeping into the mainstream. And I feel like if it would have been 20 years ago or something like that, people would have been like, whatever. But I think the time seems our society seems kind of right for that kind of stuff, that thought train, maybe. I don't know.
Yeah, there's actually a lot of really cool things in the arena of biohacking and like genome sequencing, where you can actually like data mine our own DNA and find out which like diseases and ailments we're like predisposed to, and then you can kind of attack them head on before you get them, or do things to prevent getting them. And that's awesome, but it also makes me get into like beliefs. And if you believe that you're predisposed to that, or, oh, I'm going to end up getting breast cancer or whatever because you did this. I think that's an element that we would have to consider also. And working around the beliefs once you know what you're supposed to be getting, if it's bad. Does that make sense?
You're supposed to be getting.
Yeah.
So recently, Jen and I spit into a tube and to get our DNA sequenced, primarily to see where our ancestors kind of roamed the earth about. Not so much for the health aspects of it, to try to find out what kind of things we might be prone to, like you were talking about there, Kat. But I think one of the cool things is that is available like in our home. Like we were able to just spit in a tube, throw it in the mail, and in a month and a half or so, we're going to have a much better idea to what's going on there.
I'm curious. Do you have any thoughts from a security standpoint on that?
Really weird that you did.
Same one
I will say, I think most of it is stemming from my side of the family. I don't know who my paternal grandfather is, and there's been rumors on the street. So kind of just finding out my history, my background on that piece. And I did mention something last night about I can be a conspiracy theorist very quickly. And so I had mentioned, those concerns. And I said no to storing all my information and stuff and using it for data. So we'll see.
So I think the third party just got involved with the organization that we went through. I wouldn't have gone through the organization if I had known, like, I think 2 days before I placed the order, would have gone a different route. But as far as security goes, it is an interesting idea of somebody else having access to your DNA and DNA of, the 10 million other people. I'd like to think that that's not going to cause a problem, but it could come back to bite. It's absolutely possible.
But I mean, it is really all of what you believe in. So I mean,
there's
in that piece, I can believe that environmental things can hurt me, and I can believe that, or I can say, hey, I walk in the power of Christ and can overcome whatever things are thrown my way because Jesus.
Looks like a squirrel, but I know the answer is Jesus. For all of human history, the idea of death has been an awareness, right? We're aware of old age. We're aware of sickness and physical deformations and maladies and all sorts. So sickness and death is something that humanity is very aware of. And when you understand how beliefs work, it is the double-edged sword of becoming aware of what is that you can very easily begin to empower that, right? So when you get your DNA tested or you figure out your genome and all this stuff, it's like, oh, really cool. I can stop this breast cancer before it happens. But now I have this mental construct for being disposed, is that the right word? Predisposed to breast cancer. And suddenly you can get the worry and the stress and the fear that starts to create that reality when before you didn't, so it's do you or do you not? And knowing yourself and your spiritual capacity to deal with that stuff it's a interesting balance to take.
Certainly. And I think one of the really interesting things to remember and to keep in perspective is that your genetics are the blueprints. And then there's epigenetics, which is how those genes are expressed. And we've got Bruce Limpton on the site, several videos from him. The biology of belief, I think, is something that everybody needs to look into. So if you haven't been to the epoch.org and checked out his videos there, I think that's a really good place to start to see how your beliefs are going to impact your biology. I mean,
It's kind of funny because I haven't really heard of anybody really putting the two together as far as the science. I've heard a lot, or I've read a lot of guys talking about how you can affect your genetics by taking this or that, et cetera, but nobody really says, hey, you know, the way that your perspective on life, the way that you approach life, et cetera, can also have an effect on your genes, kind of like how Bruce says that. Kind of a, unless somebody has, you know.
It's funny you say that, Dave.
Oh my word.
What did you find, Jen?
I found, and I have my book over here. So there was a college professor named Louis Terman. Is that how I say it?
Looks good to me.
Terman. And he is actually a professor in Stanford, and he started the Longevity Project in 1921. He basically got these kids kind of really young in age, and he would interview them. He would keep stats on them, you know, single family, married family, health things. And he tracked them up until his career and his life kind of ended. And then a couple of other master thesis students picked up his work, and they've kind of combobulated all of the findings that they found of how, you know, these kids that were young in 1921 and how they died and all the things that tied into those things. And that's kind of my hook was, you know, what the standard health tells us. And it's really, their findings were opposite of that. So we're commonly told people that are carefree, easygoing, have the best life, and they live the longest, when it's actually the opposite. It's the people that are very conscientious and are thinking about things and thinking about details. Those are the people that are going to live the longer lives, because they are making healthier choices. They're driving slower. They're eating healthier. They're sticking to their plans. Marriage was another piece that I thought was really interesting, because being in a good marriage is really only good for a man. So a man who has a good distributed personality and is good for that marriage will have a good outcome. But the numbers showed that women who were in a bad marriage and filed for divorce or even were widowed had a better lifespan because of it.
Interesting.
It was. There's another one I thought was really interesting, was that actually women who went to religious gatherings such as church had a better life expectancy because of all the social interactions that they were getting on a regular basis through church knitting clubs or whatever. So, you know, I thought it was really interesting that just the longevity of the Longevity Project coming from 1920s to this book.
That's when those tests were done?
That's when it started. That's when he started gathering his information and just collecting the data. And then I think the book was published in the early 2000s.
Right on. So I think a cool takeaway from that is that, you know, we've got, you know, tests with data going back 100 years at this point, but really the search for the fountain of youth, you know, the fountain of life, the search for immortality has been going on for a long time. And I mean, short of, you know, elixirs and sewing in monkey testicles into scrotums and all sorts of weird, like, these are things that
I read it today.
Frozen people. You know, what is different about longevity in this age?
I have a really quick, I want to touch on what Jen said real quick. And then we'll go monkey testicles. So the tests were done in the 1920s, and I'm wondering what the correlation is between men who would have been out in the workforce, would have been in offices or, you know, wherever they were working around other people and having more social interactions, and women of that time, if it's starting in the 1920s, what their role was. And it's showing that women who were widowed or going to church functions and having more community and more social interactions in their lives had longer lifespan than women that maybe have been at home and just like homemakers and only saw their husband.
No, I appreciate your question. So they started collecting the data in 1921 with school-age kiddos. So they were like first, second, third graders. So it wasn't the adults at that age. Okay. And so they just tracked them every year. They would interview teachers. They'd interview parents. They would just gather all this information, and they just did it for years and years and years. And then kind of, little Jimmy, his parents got a divorce when he was 13. How did he fare with that? What is his parents saying about that? What are his teachers saying about that? What are the communities around him saying about that? And then asking him questions. The professor, Lewis Terman, was very into personalities and intelligences, and he's actually the person who kind of pushed for standardized testing and the IQ piece in education, because he truly believed that depending on your personality plays into your IQ, and then where can we kind of put you in a track in life kind of thing. So while he did some great work, some of his life choices and philosophies I don't totally agree with.
Yeah, it's really interesting that he would go with IQ, which I think at this point has been pretty thoroughly debunked, or just at least put in the corner with baby. But,
no, I think looking at his work, and even in the book, throughout the book, there's different questions on kind of like rate yourself, kind of like what we see with personalities, or just all of those IQ things. Like, he started all of that. So it's kind of cool to see where that started, but then also where are we going to take it? Does it have an effect in our lives? So now.
Okay, back to monkey testicles, I guess.
Well, I was going to say something. I don't know how you probably listened to it, Matt, the Joe Rogan podcast with David Sinclair.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
Yeah, let me see. Let me not completely destroy the Sirtuins.
Sirtuins, yes, sir.
Okay.
And if you're listening, this is Sirtuins.
Okay. Yes. So the stuff that he takes, NMN, right?
Yes.
M&Ms?
Which is nicotinamide mononucleotide.
The green ones do.
Oh wait, okay, hold on.
Sexy.
And then okay, so I'm trying to put the science together so I can actually not completely destroy it as I say it. Resveratrol and NMN make the Sirtuins stressed, right? Did I understand that correctly? And that's what provides the protection,
proper stress. Aging? Yeah, it's a proper stress for them, and it's there's a whole pathway involved. And I mean, anybody wants that laid out.
It's a great podcast.
Yeah, and by the way, David Sinclair lays it out. He's got a website too. I think it's lifespan.io. If you wanted to go check out his site, that talks about anti-aging exclusively too. But yeah, so there's the Sirtuins, which are huge in the anti-aging process. There's resveratrol, it's resveratrol. Sorry, which you might find in like red wine. It's that antioxidant.
Hype.
And then, there's metformin, which is good for this pathway. As far as which is like a diabetes medication.
Yeah.
Which people are like, how do you get that? Do I have to get diabetes so I can get that?
It's super cheap, but we can talk about that later. But anyways, would there be any correlation between what Jen was saying in regards to the people that seem to, let's, for lack of better words, are more structured with their life, and therefore be a little more stressed? Or is this the wrong kind of stress that we're talking about? It's just a thought. As she was talking about it, I was like, oh, I wonder if this has anything to do with that.
Well, actually, David, part of the findings in the study was that there is a good amount of, there's helpful stress and there's harmful stress. And the people that have those careers that kind of push them a little bit more, and they're under that healthy stress, they actually do well. And it's based on those accomplishments that they say, hey, I had a good life, as opposed to, I got everything that I did really easy, and there was really nothing really to work for. There was a discrepancy there. But I also think about people that go to the gym and, you're doing your reps, and then all of a sudden, like, these reps are really easy, I'm not seeing any gains. And then I pick up, the next pound up and I'm stressing my muscles. Then I see the muscles getting formed in more definition. So there is, whether it's personality or physical or probably even biohacking wise, a little bit of stress in a good healthy dose is probably going to get there.
Sure. Well, it's all about the gains, boys.
Right.
But when you have that kind of stress, you have stress and recovery, stress and recovery, stress and recovery versus chronic stress, where your body's never able to recover. You're just in this constant state of fight or flight, and where it's literally like pushing your blood to the extremities and away from your internal organs, so that you can run faster or fight better, as opposed to your internal organs getting all the nutrient blood flow that they need to function and do their job. So I think there's a big difference in exercise stress versus chronic stuck in traffic after a hard day of work that you don't like going to, and then coming home and being overwhelmed with responsibilities that you don't have enough time to tackle, that you get not enough sleep, which is huge for longevity from a physical standpoint. But yeah, so definitely stress is good, but so is recovery.
The right kind of stress.
I mean, any discussion about longevity has to include a discussion about basically the vitality of that longevity, right?
Sure.
I don't know. I don't want to live to 180 years old, where the last 80 I can't walk.
Just rocking the rascal for 80 years.
Right, exactly. Like, no, that's okay. I'll dip out at 105. I'll be fine.
Rascal technology has improved so much.
It's the hover rascal.
But I mean, that stress, and that goes to, you see it in nature, right? I mean, one of my favorite examples of the value of crappy things or difficult things or stress is that biosphere, the original biosphere, where the trees finally got large enough to start having fruit, and they just started falling over, right? Because they realized that one of the things they were missing inside the biosphere was wind, right? And the trees and the plants never learned how to stand up. So stress can absolutely produce a much better version of life, as long as it is of the right sort. And obviously it's not controlling and ruining your life, but it's giving more value to it. That's why I'm wondering, with that research that they did, is it less about the correlation between men and a family or women in church, and this is more about the correlation between the value that they get, that people are getting out of the stress and out of their interaction with the world. And I would think, I don't know. I know for me how I would view that as far as the
church is stressful.
Yeah. They talk about, I didn't read the study, so I'm going off of what Jen said about the, women who go to the church groups and stuff like that. There's a certain dynamic there and a certain type of stress versus the men in the workplace who have a good place to come home and kind of relax. And it's just different things where, often, at least how I grew up, when dad was home, my mom was stressed, right? Because now it's time to get the food ready and and it's kind of vice versa. So I think it is interesting to look at it more through the lens of the value of that experience of being and how that plays into, if you really back all the way out, like if I'm enjoying life, even though it's difficult, there's a subconscious thing that says, I want to enjoy it longer, right? And if I'm not enjoying life, there's something going on that says, I'm out of here.
The other thing to think about in regards to this study is this generation of people that he was keeping track of were part of the Great Depression and World War II.
Mm-hmm.
And they would have been of fighting age, give or take, around World War II. And they were in the Great Depression era, right when they were starting school. So those are two really big things that that cause stress, if you will. And people had to basically, figure out how to eke out their life and figure out how to eat, So this was a very, very quote unquote stressful time of their
History?
lives. History.
Yeah.
Yeah, sorry.
World War II was kind of stressful, I guess you could say.
Just a hair.
It's supposedly, I mean.
I think what we'll find as we start talking more about different people's points, that we, at least between Matt and I, we're always trying to find this formula, A plus B equals C, and that formula is going to fit for everyone. And I think at the end of the day, you have to come to the table with, what do I have, in my social bank, in my physical bank, in my spiritual bank, and then find the formula that makes you complete to get you to the end goal. And so if you're listening and getting those nuggets, like what speaks to me on filling up so I can keep going. Because what I know in our house alone, Matt was like, we need to do this. And I'm like, no, we don't. And I'll say, we need to make goals. And he's like, you're crazy. So it's just finding those things that complete you and make you whole. And I think that's what drew me to this study, was that it is no one size fits all. It's based on what you were given and what you have and where you take it and what's thrown at you and how you can be resilient and dodge those wrenches.
Before somebody hops in on that one, I do want the record to show that I posted about goals today on Instagram. So I'm good.
And where can you find that?
Measurable goals.
You're good for the year.
I think that what Jen is saying also, like, that plays into beliefs. Like, what I believe works for me is going to work for me. Right. And it's going to be different than what works for him or for you or for Christina or whatever. Like, I think beliefs, I think that's the biggest thing. Because even with, like, biohacking, if you truly believe that something is going to benefit your body, it's going to it will benefit your body. And if you don't believe it does, then it won't.
That's why the most powerful drug in the world is the placebo.
I know.
Proven over and over and over again that placebo is the most effective drug in the world.
So are we in an age where mindsets and beliefs are changing the game?
Yeah.
If that's what you believe.
Oh boy. you guys all know Christopher Teasdale, right? Mm-hmm. And he's a really good friend of all of us. And one of his kind of current hot buttons is the reality that it is impossible. There's zero possibility that you could have the same belief structure as any other human. Mm-hmm. Because even if you're twins raised by the same parents, raised like all the same training, everything like that, you're still going to have different conversations. You're going to have different things happen to you. You're going to have
you perceive things differently.
You watch the same event from a different angle. I mean, you cannot become identical in anybody else's beliefs. And if you understand the construct and the framework that gets built with your beliefs and just how many millions of micro beliefs and then your thousands of major beliefs, we have millions of ways in which we believe in death. Mm-hmm. Right? We have a few hundred in when it comes to sickness and aging and all that stuff. And then we've got genetic, epigenetic things going on. For those who don't know, epigenetics is essentially proving, and this is Dr. Bruce Lipton. I know Carolyn Leaf is talking about a lot of it. Greg Braden talks about it. Epigenetics is the idea that your genetics can actually be changed through the environment that you give yourself. And in this case, it's the vibrational frequency of your thought and your belief and your emotions, so that you can literally, it's proven scientifically that your cells can change based on the frequency of your thoughts and emotions. And so that's hence the biology of belief. So it is the thousands of beliefs we carry, the millions of kind of smaller clusters of things that we believe just on such a personal level. It is absolutely it's a game that we play with ourselves to try to work to get into the place where this worked for me. So let me start a podcast and let me tell the whole world how this should work for you, because we all know that this diet is the one that saves you, and this diet and this pill and that pill. And yet so few are kind of going in and going, but what do you believe about all this stuff? And you get these subcultures surrounding, I'm thinking of some of the, like, bulletproof, right? You've got this this kind of subculture of people that's around this kind of diet concept and this way of being and different biohacking things, everything like that. And clearly you attract people that believe similar things. And yet I know some, you get these like bulletproof Nazis that are like, if you don't do bulletproof, you're going to die. You're like, well, what about this group over here that says it should be all vegetarian, or this group over here that says you should be all meat and cheese, and this group over here that says you shouldn't eat at all because, you don't need food. And yet you're looking at different results and you're seeing a lot of them beginning to prove themselves out. And it really, to me, how do you look at that? You can look at it genetically, but to me, absolutely, it is, well, what are you believing?
So what, I mean, is it enough to wish that you have the beliefs that it takes to be functionally immortal? Or, if somebody has these limiting beliefs that they know, okay, like I expect to go to work until I'm 65, retire, and then, my parents died maybe 10 years after, not my parents, but just, 10 years after they retired, and then that's what I expect to happen for me too. Is it enough to get rid of those bad beliefs, or do you have to put on good beliefs? And how do you even go about changing those beliefs? Is there a way?
Nope. There's no way. You're stuck.
All right, next question.
I mean, I know I can definitely speak to this, but I know I'm not the only one. So,
well, but you got this.
All right. So, I mean, if anything is true, there's a way in which it is true. I love that saying. You guys know that. And so we can sit here and say immortality is within our grasp. It's mentally within the belief system of even science now that we can get there. And that, to me, by the way, when spirituality has been saying that for thousands of years, that someday we would be glorified, have glorified bodies, that we would be immortal. And now you're getting science saying, yeah, we're probably 1 or 2 generations away from that potential.
Oh man, they've actually got a word for it already. It's longevity escape velocity. The idea that, you're going to get to a certain point where science is extending your life longer than the days that it takes to produce that technology. So. Yeah.
And it's real. I've watched some great, podcasts and different YouTubes on it and stuff like that. I know it's they're really getting into stem cells and all the different ways they could do this. But the point being is it's now entering into the mind of humanity in a scientific way, because spiritually it's been there for a long time, and it has been a promise of a coming day. And yet, so you ask yourself spiritually, is there anything that has ever been given to humanity that was not completely logical by the time it came to us? That the time was just, yeah, this makes sense. It's time. And if you look at the trajectory and the story of humanity and its relationship to God, and you get this ebb and flow of that, we're getting closer and closer and closer to seeing God in each other, that we're seeing divinity in everyone, regardless of your belief system, because we're realizing that separation and that, the God is over there, we're down here, I'm on the good side, you're on the bad side. All of that separation between us and him and between us and each other, that is starting to get less and less and less. And the veil is getting paper thin between realizing that we are creators, that we are his offspring, and that we are like him. And so it makes sense that it is time for humanity to start stepping into a place where death and decay and pain and sickness and all that it's starting to enter into our mental construct that this is possible. Yet, if anything's true, there's a way in which it is true. We can talk about immortality and we can talk about longevity, and yet you have so many thousands and millions of sub-beliefs that still need to be addressed. And I think about the thing like, okay, so we're talking about longevity and immortality. What happens if you get run over by a train? Mm-hmm. Right? Because we're talking about old age. We're talking about that. but what about if someone tries to kill you, shoot you with a bullet? Right. So it is bigger than that.
When I kind of think of it as those baby steps and those beliefs. I think a couple of years ago, I moved to a place where there was more critters running across the road. And I just came to the belief that I don't hit things with my car, and my car doesn't hit things. So that accounts for me running over something, and that also accounts for something running into my car, because that happens, we know. And I haven't, it's been years now since I made that belief in my head that my car doesn't hit things and things don't hit my car. There was another one, but I lost it. Just those little nuggets of those baby steps of, I can't say my life is forever. I'm not going to die, because that's just a really big bite, but taking those smaller bites, like, I am always healthy. I'm always well. And then when I do get sick, I'm like, but I'm healthy. I'm going to get well. I'm going to live in that promise of being healthy. And I think that's kind of what you were asking of the how piece. Cause, I think in this group, at least, we all have the mentality of, yes, we believe these things, but how do we walk in them, and how do we share those beliefs and those tips and tricks with the people listening to us?
Well, we know that there's... Go ahead.
Sorry, I was just going to say that was one of the things I was going to ask you guys about, because if you have beliefs like this, how do you interact with, let's term them deathers?
I prefer anti-lifers.
But I feel like, death is sort of revered in a way. Like, there's a fear of death, but then also at the same time, there's like the
glorification of it.
Yes, glorification, honor, reverence.
Especially in the spiritual community, yeah.
For sure. Like, even in Christianity, like, isn't the body considered a curse sometimes? Like the curse of the flesh and stuff like that. And then if everybody's waiting for the rapture or to be called home to heaven or something, of course, we're not going to unlock immortality if dying is the end game prize.
Or if, death is going to heaven and walking a street of gold and praising God all day long. That's way better than what I'm doing right now on earth.
Way better than bringing heaven to earth.
Right.
I think that there's a reality too to once we address our own personal beliefs. Like, I believe in the universal consciousness and that we're all connected through the Christ consciousness or universal consciousness. And if death is like a universal knowing, like everybody knows that the body decays and then dies eventually, do we have to make our own beliefs strong enough to overcome the power of the universal consciousness believing in death? That it's a fact, or are we working towards like a complete global shift of belief that death is not concrete?
Well, that's why I think that it's probably going to have to shift into people being able to see that it's physically possible with science and all that kind of stuff, in order to shift the belief with everything else. Like, because there's obviously, like you said, us, and there's what do we do with people who accidentally die? We don't want to leave them behind or whatever. But to be able to shift consciously in a more holistic way, I think that probably have to start with the physical in order for everybody to actually believe that it's a thing.
Well, and I think
enough people.
It's already started because of basically what Austin said. The one of his first points was, death is a disease.
And
I think
that was in that. Was that in that podcast?
Aubrey de Grey and David Sinclair, and I think all those people are saying the same thing. Yeah. That death is not the only reason why people don't think that it's a disease is because it happens to everybody. Which you can say, chicken or egg situation here. What?
Right.
Does everybody get it because everybody believes in it, or does everybody believe in it because everybody gets it? I don't know. But I think that's a really important step. That, hey, it's a disease. We're recategorizing it as a disease, and so let's move on from there.
You guys know the story of the first man who ever lifted over 600 pounds? That I think it was back in the 50s. That so many people in different countries, Russia, the United States, Germany, these different weightlifters, kept trying to deadlift over 600 pounds, and nobody could do it. And so they actually, I think it was National Geographic or Time Magazine, like it started to become a quote unquote scientific fact that man cannot lift over 600 pounds. Right. And so you started having all of these guys that would get to, 598, 599, 600, couldn't do it. And over and over and over again. And I think it was a guy in Russia. They finally, his trainers put like 602 pounds or something on, but they told him it was 598, and he lifted it, and they were like, and of course it hit the news, and within a month, 4 other people did it. Suddenly it was possible.
Sounds just like the 4-minute mile.
That's what I was going to say. That's what
Yeah, I mean, this humanity, it's the same with flight, right? I mean, Thomas Troward, my favorite author, love him. He talks about this. I mean, he very, very articulately lays out that immortality, simply by the mere fact that it's in the creative heart of man, is going to happen. Now, we have to allow ourselves the grace to get there, as Jen was talking about, the baby steps. But there's so many examples out throughout human history that what we think is a fact, the moment somebody proves it wrong, suddenly humanity on a consciousness, and it was what you're asking, I think, because you were asking, is it personal or is it global? And I said, yes. Like, it's because someone's going to have to take it very personally and kind of go beyond that and become the first person to prove it. Well, how do you do that? Like, how do you prove that you're the first person to not die? Like, you just have to be around for a really freaking long time? Like, so it's going to be interesting, but at the same time, is it entering into the global consciousness? And yes, and the ages kind of prove out that all of these progressions. So Jesus came 2,000 years ago and introduced the idea that we should be one and we should see God in each other, and that we should love one another as the family of God, right? And yet 2,000 years later, it's like the heart cry of humanity that we stop the wars, that we start seeing each other as one, that we start seeing God in each other. So we're seeing the culmination, the global culmination of what a small group of people started. And it's going to and that's how it happens in every age. And I write about this in my blog for this week, that we're going to see a small group of people start apprehending longevity/immortality, and 2,000 years later, it will be the norm for the human experience. But it's going to take some time to get there.
I feel like, though, that it's a lot. Things are a lot faster than they used to be because of the literal connectedness that everybody has, that everybody experiences with the internet and stuff. So, I mean, the pattern-wise, yeah. But like, I wonder if something happens that causes stuff to go slower, because otherwise, like, it should not take as long as it did in the past.
There actually is. So the constellations, quick little factoid. We have a binary system. We are a binary star with Sirius, another star, and so they do essentially a figure 8 around each other, and they're constantly rotating as a binary rotation, and the closer they get together, the faster we move. And the further you are apart, the slower. So the ages that we're coming out of were slower than the ones we're coming into. So I say it's an average of 2,000 years per age, but there's certain ages that actually aren't 2,000, and there's ages that are a bit longer than 2,000. So I do believe it will be faster, but it's hard to quantify that. I've never lived through it.
Well, and I have a question, because Tina had mentioned that through the help of science and technology that we can live longer. And then, Austin, you said that there's going to be a group of people who you think will be able to put on immortality, and then the rest of us. How does the technology piece tie into it? Are the group of people putting on, arms and metal hearts, or is it kind of like, now I'm walking in my holy garments of angel body dust glitter?
I mean, to me, it goes back to, what do you believe, right? Because it is, and I do believe there will be people who walk, monks in the middle of the mountains that don't need robot arms, and I think you're going to get other people who by their creative capacity as humans, will create immortality through science and technology. My question to anybody is, how is prayer and fasting any less creative than science and research? You know,
there's actually scientific research going into the physical benefits of fasting on and the effects on longevity, and like the stress that we put on our body by asking it to digest 3 square meals a day instead of taking that time of fasting to detoxify and kind of get rid of harmful things that cause premature aging on cells. And so we've known in the spiritual community the benefits of fasting for hundreds and thousands of years, the benefits of fasting and its connection to divine communication and clearing your mind and stuff like that. And now we're finding it linked to the body's longevity through science. So again, science and spirituality coming together and honoring both sides of that.
Right on. I think David Sinclair mentioned earlier, like his number one thing for anti-aging is caloric restriction, eating less. And then the fasting part, I've been doing intermittent fasting for a while now, whether it's eating within an 8-hour window or a 6 or a 4-hour window each day, whatever it is. And what that allows your body to do, there's this process called autophagy, where your body basically takes the old underperforming parts and recycles them and produces new parts. And so when you can increase autophagy, and you're basically, giving yourself brand new parts, and life's better with brand new parts, I have to imagine.
Right. That's one of the scientific sides that I saw was the stem cells, and it's kind of like at least how I heard it on one video was it's kind of like a photocopy of a photocopy over time, and that eventually that photocopy degrades. But what if you could go back to the original photocopy, right? And that's what stem cells are, is they are the original photocopy, and the ability to reintroduce those to your system so that, you do have new parts again. And it's not this 80-year photocopy of a photocopy of a photocopy for every cell, which is where aging and decay and all that comes from. At least that's what the video said.
And I agree. Huge pushes forward in the field of stem cells. My next question, though, would be, if we can make that assumption that immortality is a thing going forward, that the two certainties in life are no longer death and taxes, but just taxes. What are the ethical considerations of people wanting to live for much longer lifespans than we currently do now? How does it impact the global community and the economic stratification of folks?
Well, that David Sinclair guy, he addressed something like one of the things obviously that people always say is like, oh, population, it's going to be out of control. He actually said something that the trend is when countries are more developed or more wealthy or something, that they have fewer kids. And so his estimation or calculation, or his report of calculations by somebody, I don't know, was that population would cap out around 9 or 10 billion, which I don't know how you can cap out per se, but I guess if you're living forever, at some point,
you have to have kids to entertain yourself.
No, but I mean, like, eventually people would all be like, do we also continue having kids forever? Because perhaps not. And then at that point, you're just people, adults, old adults. I mean,
I think an interesting thing is, maybe females by all means light me up on this one, but aren't you ladies born with just a finite amount of eggs? So I guess
if that's what you believe, sir.
Well, if we're born with a finite amount of years that we're allowed to live, then I would imagine so. But if we can unlock immortality, I would imagine. You would think that you might have more years of prime if you're living for thousands of years and you only have like 40 years in the very beginning.
Well, the whole thing is, if I've been reading it correctly, it's making sure that you live forever, but at the same time, the Gray says that you're not living forever. Well, I mean, the whole question about the quality of life, you're going to you would live forever and have the body of a young adult. So what does that mean for eggs? I mean,
well, at least not a decrepit old person.
Right.
Like an older person.
I mean, his basic premise is what we're trying to get to is restoring the body, and basically doing preventative maintenance. And he made the analogy of a Model T car that, there's some that still run and that drive around, like as if they had just come out of the factory floor. So it's with careful restoration and preventative maintenance, et cetera, and if it needs a new part, well, he gets a new part. So, I mean, I guess the question is getting science to that point, and then what does that mean for eggs?
Sure.
Yeah.
Is it science or belief?
Get a new part with more eggs. I don't know.
I do want to touch on Tina's point, though, that I'm going back in the memory banks. I think a nation needs like 2.1 babies for every couple to maintain a stable population. And as countries go through as they develop and they go from an undeveloped nation to a highly developed nation, the tree of, I don't know, the proper word for it is right now, it escapes me, but
babies?
No, just the population structure for age. You find that lesser developed nations have a very broad base for tons of kids, and at the top, very few. And then you have countries that are developed, and they get to the point where they're top heavy, where they have very few young people, hardly enough, maybe not even enough, to support an aging population. And so at that point, immigration becomes a very helpful thing, because now you have new workers coming in to support an aging population. However, David Sinclair was talking about how with extended lifespans, the numbers that you're talking about are less than what many nations deal with in immigration.
Right.
So. Well, he was saying, he said in that podcast that basically most of Europe they're not having enough babies to recuperate what they lose. In other words, they're losing people.
And is that by choice, or is that by unable to?
I think it's just the whole being a developed nation deal.
You don't need 9 kids for a farm.
So yes, I guess choice.
Yeah.
I guess choice is. I mean, go ahead. Sorry.
I think if we live intentionally, like if you imagine the people that would be unlocking immortality and wanting to live forever, and they would be so intentional. Like, you're not going to live forever and just like stay in your mother's basement and play video games. Like, you would have a plan for your life, I would imagine, or you would be living intentionally. You wouldn't just be cranking out kids, or you would have, I would imagine that you would have children intentionally. Like, it would be a better thought out thing. You wouldn't be trying to like cram it into your prime if you got to choose when you would be able to have children. Even if it's like, even if you save your eggs, and I don't know how it would work when we're immortal, but having a surrogate, or if you do have new parts and can have babies whenever, for me, if I were immortal, I would choose a very specific time in that span to have children, and then imagine even the mental health and the energy of a society where they were born out of intention, instead of like, well, we better have kids, we got married, so we better pop them out while we can. And I think that would help the overpopulation, because it wouldn't just be, cranking out kids. The people that are alive would be very intentional, I would imagine.
So to kind of address that family planning aspect of things, if you can live to see not just your children and grandchildren and maybe even great grandchildren, but your great grandchildren, and you're that matriarch or patriarch that was alive pre-digital era.
The internet.
Yeah. Let me tell you about rotary phones. All right. I mean, I don't know. Have you guys kind of ever imagined what that's like? Allowed yourself to kind of have that belief?
Right now. And I think that's the first step to longevity, is having that creative mind inside and like, what if? What does it look like? And then you take your next steps. But that's my
I think you have to start. Sorry.
That's the beauty of thought too. I mean, I don't know. There's no way for us to know what previous generations sat around and talked about. But we're having a conversation that I think maybe kind of new in the history of humanity, at least in a public forum anyway. Otherwise, put us in a loony bin and.
Yeah. No, what I was going to say was,
that's what happened to Mayans.
Squirrel.
I'm 400 years old. No, you're not, sir. You're going to come with me.
Your calendar's wrong.
Go ahead, Christina.
But just the whole concept of having to totally re-evaluate your future and like what life looks like with all of that potential is like, people definitely don't have a frame of mind for that right now, and they don't have there's various mindsets that have to shift and that are starting to shift, and that's definitely one of them. And I think just the whole shift of purposeful work in general is kind of one of those little subtle things that's changing in order to make room for the concept of living longer. And there's just so many little subtle things, like you said, Austin, that have to change, and that's just one.
Well, the first people are going to have to deal with really weird things. Like, I expect to be hit with identity theft accusations maybe at some point, because, sir, you've been pulling off of your Social Security now for 80 years. Is really
oh my word! I mean, think about things like that. Social Security. I mean, they're already bankrupt. What are you going to do? Sure. Really? I mean,
that system was built for a population that was supposed to live to 68.
Yeah. I really tend to suspect, I don't know what you would call it, but that there are people that already are either have been resurrected in the past and are like living, or have figured some of this stuff out already, and they're just kind of keeping to themselves, and or like the world's huge, like, so you could reinvent yourself like a bajillion times in different parts of the world. Like, so I personally think there's probably people that are already there.
There's a major belief systems around the idea that the Apostle John never died.
Yeah,
because there have to be people.
But is he still on the earth, or is he hanging out with Jesus like Enoch and Eli?
Right.
But think about all the people that were resurrected when Jesus rose from the dead. Like, what? They can't tell me they died again.
No, that we don't talk about that verse.
They just ascended into heaven, and they're hanging out.
Okay, but what? Where is the room for? Like, how does that make sense in your?
No, actually, probably.
I don't know. Well, and I'm kind of wondering what you guys think about Hollywood and the media that people put out. I think of like superheroes and our fascination with them, and like vampires and witches and werewolves, and how does that all tie into what I might call, I don't know. What do you guys think about that? I'm not gonna preface that.
Yes,
I think it's part of to me that the awakening of our capabilities.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's entered into, just like immortality, just like space travel. I mean, there's a lot of stuff that I believe if you want to see what is entering into the heart of mankind, just look at the science fiction world, and you get. I mean, it's pretty crazy when you look back and go find different studies and stuff that have been done, or different kind of historical looks at, oh my gosh, the science fiction world saw cars looking like this 30 years ago, and now they look like this.
Well, do they look like that because they were forward thinkers, or because they dropped a nugget into some little kid who grew up thinking, I'm going to go build a rocket ship to Mars and we're all going to live there?
I mean, it's both, because that's how it works. That's how we enter it. So now man is thinking about space, and you've got kids growing up right now with Elon Musk saying, is we're going to do this.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Mm-hmm. You've got kids growing up right now where every good movie is somebody who's got a superpower, right? And now they're starting to come out with, like, I don't know if you guys have seen Glass. It's out right now, and it talks about, essentially the premise is, it's an M. Night Shyamalan. Yeah, that guy. And it's three characters who are just normal people, but they believe they have superpowers, right?
Okay, cool. That's what we talked about a long time ago.
It's a bit suspense thriller going, right? Because there's a bad guy and there's a good guy, and then there's a mastermind who antagonizes the whole thing. But it's interesting because it pits them against a secret group that has been around for thousands of years. So one of the main characters has this theory that every comic book character and all these legends throughout history were actually historical accounts that were made to look like fake stories, and that there's a group that's been suppressing the truth and hiding what humanity is capable of by always kind of killing off the bad guys or keeping the stories or whatever. And this not to give away the whole movie, but this has that component where there's an evil group trying to actually convince these guys with superheroes that they're just crazy. And
that's cool.
I believe it's now all that to say, it's now going beyond you need to be bit by a spider, you need to be a wealthy billionaire, or you need to be from another planet. You're now starting to see movies that come out and say, no, you're just a normal person who believes in yourself. And that's the entire premise of the mastermind guy, is he wants it to go on the internet that these guys have these powers so that people can start seeing it. And the closing scene of the movie is there's a bunch of people in a train station looking at their phones, watching these dudes with superpowers. And the whole idea is like they're waking up to what's possible. And that's in Hollywood. Was there a spoiler alert
put out in front of that?
Yeah, I was going to say
there was not. But it's totally good.
I just watched the whole movie.
Fortunately, I saw Jennifer put her fingers in her
headphones.
So I didn't hear a single thing you said.
We'll just cut that part out, I guess.
Well, there's a lot of
that. While somebody was talking there, I was looking it up. There's a guy in India that claims to be 179 years old. There's an Indonesian man that says he's 145. And right sandwiched in between those finds in the search engine, it's scientists claim many people could soon live beyond 120 years old. So,
did you see that guy in India who hasn't eaten for 40 years or drank anything?
Not this occasion, but yeah.
Does he look like that? He hasn't eaten in 40 years?
I mean, he's skinny and got leathery skin, but cognitive and everything.
I would imagine you would look like beef jerky by then. Got to preserve yourself somehow.
There is an underlying component in here, because you talked about getting new body parts. There's still a belief that the body parts you have will decay. It's so multifaceted.
It's ridiculous.
To touch on Hollywood real quick again, I think it's an awesome tool if it's used properly to introduce mass belief, and I think that's what Austin was getting at with the spoiler. But seriously, like before with Star Trek and stuff like that, and introducing these concepts and ideas for like cell phones and stuff like that, and then they come out, there's giving the idea, but we're giving. I got nothing. That was my point.
we're giving the next generation is being raised with regular conversation around living on Mars, around living to forever, around being able to not have to work a manufacturing job and figuring out how to just do what you want to do. I mean, there's so many changes, and the old systems. By the way, I mean I'm a huge fan of capitalism in theory, but I think you get people living super long and you start getting, if you guys ever see, there was another movie. It's got Channing Tatum in it, and
Do I need to plug my ears?
no, but it's just the whole idea. Like, there's this humanoid race from another planet, and there's some they have this technology that they're immortal, and they pretty much just own the universe, and everyone else is a slave, and they just don't know it. You know, the idea of like those who live really long own everything. And so I think you have to get away from some of these systems that have kind of been predicated on the old way of being, and we're going to have to rethink everything.
Yeah. Well, the concept of capitalism, I feel like, is hinged a little bit on Darwinism, the survival of the fittest concept, and for sure, things are trending towards collaboration and working. Like, you can do so much more together, and that's actually one of the things. I don't remember exactly. I lost my notes, but people are starting to work together a lot more in the science aspect. The different disciplines of science are working together, and that's what's helping to speed things up with the progress in reversing aging and stuff like that. So I think that's pretty cool.
It was one point I was going to make in regards to the internet, that it's basically kind of throwing fuel in the fire, because we have the ability to share information, research, etc. so easily now.
The concept of open source stuff, like you build on top of other people's work, and I don't know, it's really cool, I think.
It is. I watched a documentary on Netflix about 9 different PhD specialists that went and like visited each other, and kind of like did a circle where one went and visited, and then that guy went to the next person, and that person went to the next lady, and it came back around. And there was multiple examples where you had a psychologist hanging out with a quantum physicist, and they were pulling out of each other like, "Oh, I've never thought of that." And you could tell behind the scenes they're like, "I've got some new things to go try," because you're getting out of your rut. And yeah, the internet and cell phones and everything. I mean, that's only freaking 20 years.
Yeah. Right. Just to throw one more pop culture reference in here, there's a Netflix show, Altered Carbon, that kind of addresses the topic of longevity from a technological standpoint. And I mean, I think it's rated mature, so pepper yourself. But yeah, and you know, I thought of a nickname for like Austin. His superhero name or supervillain name would be the Spoiler.
Oh, nice.
We're kind of coming towards the end of our hour here, though. So, is there anything that you guys have, like one point that we didn't go over that you really wanted to get out before we start closing shop here?
I'll start us off. I think it's a mixture of things: that mental, the social, the physical health. When you focus on those beings and you focus on a balance, that it equals longevity, and everyone has a different balance they need to balance for.
Are we popcorning?
Go for it. Tico and Tina.
All right. I guess I would just, my takeaway is probably, or my thinking right now is just, we have to all start or do better, I guess, at paying attention, being intentional, noticing the beliefs that we have around death, and the little subtle things that play into that whole almost like culture of death, and revering it, and honestly even just to some extent struggle in general, the belief that things need to be hard and we have to fight hard for stuff. And I don't know, I think it all is a little bit tied together, but that's what I think. Start recognizing those subtle beliefs.
Me?
Yeah.
One of the things that really stood out for me here was the fact that there can be multiple avenues to get to the same point. But it was really fascinating, especially in regards to hearing the scientific part of it, and them saying, well, this is how it's going to happen, and this is what we need to do, and this is what we're doing now, and it's them even saying, we're probably we are probably with the first generation of people that are going to be living forever, as far as our children. So, and then adding to that, the whole Bruce Lipton, Carolyn Leaf, whatever, epigenetics, and it just being, it almost seems to me to be a different avenue to get to the same place. We can do it through chemistry, or we can do it through medicine, or we can also do it through our beliefs and learning how to think, and learning how to what perspectives to take in regards to the world around us. And so it was just kind of a fascinating thought. This is two different avenues to get to the same place.
Well, I think going off of what David just said too, I think if we take parts of each, science and spirituality, and work with our beliefs and understand, like believing that we can live forever, and then instead of like one or the other, like either I'm going to do it spiritually and figure it out, or I'm going to do it scientifically and figure it out that way. But it just seems like it would be a lot easier to like prepare ourselves spiritually, and then honor the fact that humans came up with that scientific possibility of living longer, and that it's not something to be discounted, but again, honored. And I mean, why not make the most of it and utilize that also? So I don't know, they've kind of been at odds, science and spirituality forever. Like you can only pick one or the other. And I think that there's a lot to be said to using both of them. I think we get a lot farther, a lot faster.
I don't know if mine's not necessarily a takeaway from something we've already talked about, but something that I think it's been missing a bit. I think it was touched on it once, but I think a lot of people might listen to this podcast and go, well, why would I want to live forever? Right? And it's not even like, well, I don't just want to be old, but like people don't have a grid for why humanity should be immortal. Right? And for me, that answer is absolutely a spiritual answer, that we are the body of God, that the universe needs divine creators as its leaders, and the realm of spirit and heaven and all that, they have God already. That's who he is. But in the physical, we are that representation. And I believe our intent, the whole reason we were created, was to be the body of God in the physical realm forever. And that we would be fruitful and multiply and be all over the universe, and that we would bring divinity into this, in the physical plane of matter everywhere. And so if you don't have a why, and all you're thinking of is, well, like, well, I mean, if I work my job for, like, I don't want to work it. I don't want to be there for 800 years. I don't want, exactly. Like, go bigger than that and realize that there's a bigger thing. There's a bigger why behind this discussion. And I think that is all. That's, I mean, what was it? Last podcast, we talked about kind of the introduction of the freedom to ask a bigger why. And that's, I don't think it's any mistake that that's happening, because we need a bigger why to justify hundreds of years of existence and thousands and potentially hundreds of thousands of years of existence. If you truly get to immortality, why would you be here? Now it becomes all about mission and purpose, and so much less about, well, I want a nice house and a nice car. Right? That's just the joy of experiencing today. But to really, well, like, why would I be here forever? I have to have a reason.
Sorry, that's what I was getting at earlier with the intentional, like the people that are living forever would be much more intentional than just like, well, I'm here, I guess I'll keep working at McDonald's for 374 more years.
So McDonald's doesn't exist anymore.
Right.
Yeah.
Because we don't need to eat.
Right?
When do you ever need McDonald's? So I mean, like, that's a want for sure.
No.
Don't be a hater.
For the people that want.
Haters gonna hate.
Wouldn't you feel like nostalgic about eating a Big Mac if you haven't eaten one in 500 years?
Maybe your kids maybe your great kids will never even know what a McDonald's was. You'd be like, well, let me tell you about the Big Mac.
Let me tell you about fast food. What food?
What's food?
Animals?
Savage.
I think one of the things that is important, maybe for right now, is that taking that why that Austin had in the grand scheme and is kind of making it very real for right now. And that a lot of people, especially where I used to work when I was with the Department of Defense, guys would retire there, and then sometimes as soon as 6 months later, they went from being a totally healthy guy to 6 feet under. And where do you get your purpose from? What is your why? I think that's something that each individual really has to tackle and to understand and thoroughly have a belief through and through. And beyond that, I think community is so huge. It was touched on a couple times, but just community in general. Like, who are you doing life together with, and what do they believe? And then we talked about the physical component too. If this is my body in this physical place, and I'm going to be in this physical place for a long time, this is my vehicle. Like, I'm going to treat this maybe a little better than I have, thinking that it had like a 80-year shelf life on it. There's things, if I'm going to be here a long time, maybe it's going to be more fun if I'm not, struggling with diseases based on, overeating or under-exercising or, just sitting in my couch playing Nintendo, whatever. So I thought this conversation today was really well-rounded, and it could have gone for a lot longer, but I appreciate all the thoughts that came out here. With that said, this is the Epoch Podcast, and you can find it on theepoch.org, and you can find the speakers that we've referenced today on that site as well. And thanks for joining us.